going in today was based entirely on schedules, not in any other way. That's how this has been organized here for how we'll start this conversation, which will go like this today. We'll take about 20 minutes of questions from each candidate, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions from the audience. And about 30 minutes per candidate is what we will do today. So thank you for being with us today. We love these candidate conversations from the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Celeste, thank you for being with us today. 5 days left in this election process. Okay, ballots are out. I want to ask a couple of things because we've had a chance to get to know you a bit, through the meetings that you've had, through the press and otherwise. And I'm just going to start with just kind of get to know you just a little bit better as well. What is one of the most important thing about you that we might not have been able to get to know so far just by our observations and what we've been reading?
Mine's not working. I talk about this a lot, but I want to make sure everybody knows it. So one of the most important things about me is I really believe in our American system of government. And when you're on the campaign trail, people ask about specific issues, and I try to talk about this a lot when I'm answering issues, but I want people to know that the way our system is set up is brilliant, and I want to be part of making sure that it functions the way it should. We're supposed to have, the federal government has limited powers, the states have broad powers, and then within the federal government, power is split between the three branches. And one of the reasons that I want to be involved in the legislative branch is because I think that balance of power between the branches is out of balance. I think the executive branch is too powerful. And I do talk about that a lot, but it's not always the focus. So that's one of the things I want people to know. I really think that America's best days are ahead of us. I talk to a lot of people who feel really pessimistic right now. They're not sure that our system is functioning, that we're going to survive, and I feel very optimistic about that. We just need to keep it functioning the way it was designed, and we're going to be great. That's what I want people to know.
Okay. I want to talk about the interesting geography of this district, this 2nd Congressional District. And it was designed intentionally. It has urban populations and very rural populations. Has a mix of political ideology in that mix as well. You have deep rural Utah roots. I'm kind of curious, as you've traveled that district, and as you bring your experience in rural Utah together, how do you see yourself kind of managing those expectations and the needs, which are not always exactly the same?
Yeah, they're not always exactly the same. I think the basic needs are the same. People need good representation. They need to know that whoever's representing them in Congress will fight their fights on the federal level. That's the same whether we're talking about West Valley City or Washington County. But the way I've been managing it is by being on the road. I have been everywhere in this district. If I look 10 years older now than I did in June, it's because of the miles I've put on myself. And I think the secret to good representation is showing up. And I've been doing that. I've been in every county. I've spent a lot of time up here on the Wasatch Front. People talk a lot about how I'm from Southern Utah, and that's different, and it's exciting. But it doesn't mean that I spend all of my time in Southern Utah. I'm also up here, and that's important. Showing up and hearing people where they are is the way you make sure they feel represented. And I'm confident that I can represent them well. Now I'm working on making sure that they feel it.
Mm-hmm. At a certain level, we're all Utahns also, so I'm kind of curious, are there any themes that have been sort of consistent in this district that you've seen from top to bottom, what they want from their next member of Congress?
Yeah, and some of them are sort of philosophical themes. Some of them are really specific. One theme is water. No matter where I go, people want to talk about water. Up here, it's usually the Great Salt Lake, and in southern Utah, it's water conservation, and in rural Utah, it's agriculture water. But everybody's concerned about water, and I think that's a really good sign that Utahns are really plugged in and know what's going on in the state. We are limited as to how much water we have. We're a dry state, and to have everybody thinking and talking about that, I think is really a good sign. And then everywhere I go, people want to talk about government spending, they want to talk about inflation, and they want to talk about government overreach. And that what type of overreach people are the most concerned about varies from place to place, but the idea that the government is doing too much and is too involved in people's lives seems to be pretty consistent.
I want to get into a couple of those items, but on the water issue, because that's right, we hear about this a lot in Utah. Our legislature has engaged to some extent. What is the role of the federal government, in your opinion, when it comes to water in the state of Utah?
I love that question because it's one of the absolute fundamental parts of a water conversation. Water is a state issue. The state has jurisdiction over all of the water in the state, and that's been that way as the country has developed and been settled, and it should be that way. Obviously, with the Colorado River, it flows through more than one state, so there's a federal nexus. But the role that the federal government plays in water is supporting the state's goals. The state of Utah needs to decide what its priorities are with its own water, and then my job as a federal representative, which I hope to be soon, is to support the state's goals. And that might be federal funding, it might be federal programming, it might be removing obstacles that federal permitting are putting in the way, but it's backing up the state all the time.
How would you engage with those state leaders?
Well, I have some experience engaging with state leaders on water. This is one of the things I've been doing. And I've talked to the governor's office, the Department of Natural Resources, even leadership in the state legislature, and made sure they know I have a background in water. I'm happy to work with them on water, but I always want to be supporting what they're doing. And I think the new Speaker of the House is having a water summit today. And so I told people, let me know what the state's doing. Let me know how I can back it up. When I'm no longer a candidate, if I'm a member of Congress, then I want to help the state accomplish its water goals. And I think just reiterating that and making sure everybody knows me, they know how to get a hold of me, they know that I'm here to back them up on their water plans is the biggest first step.
Okay. When you think about running for Congress, you start thinking about your goals and priorities. You've worked in Washington, D.C., worked for Congressman Stewart. I'm kind of curious, going into it with that experience, have you decided what you want to do first? Is there a couple set of goals that you have, whether legislation or otherwise? And to that, what committee assignments do you have your eyes on?
I do have goals, and I've told people this over and over. The first thing I want to do is make sure the projects that were already in the works are still on track and keep going. When I was working for Congressman Stewart, we had a whole bunch of local projects we were working on, things that cities and counties and towns in Utah said they need federal help with, that we were working with them on, and there were about 40 of them, and I want to make sure those are still on track because we've had a gap. I'm not sure everybody realizes that. Congressman Stewart resigned in September. It's now November, and so there's been a little gap in having somebody there working on those projects. So first thing, make sure those are on track, keep them going. The second thing is to make sure that people in Utah know I want to continue to do those things and find those projects, find the things that people in Utah need federal help with, and keep going on those. And you asked me about committee assignments, which is, I've said from the day I decided to run, I want to be on the House Armed Services Committee, because that's really important to Utah and to the 2nd District, and I want to be on the Natural Resources Committee. That's really important in Utah and the 2nd District. It's also where my background is the strongest. This is a special election, so whoever wins is getting sworn in almost exactly halfway through a Congress, and all those committee assignments get made at the beginning of a Congress. So freshmen usually have a hard time getting good committee assignments. A super freshman coming in the middle of a Congress really has a hard time getting good committee assignments. But I've been really vocal. I've told leadership what my goals are. I've tried to lay as much groundwork as I can. And now that Congressman Blake Moore is in leadership, maybe that'll be really good for Utah, and maybe that'll also be helpful in getting some good committee assignments.
It makes me just wonder about something we hear often is about sort of the Utah approach, politics and policy, both those things together. What is your observation about how Utah is perceived in Washington, D.C., and how it may impact your ability to get legislation done?
As far as the perception of Utah's federal delegation goes, we have a really good reputation. I've had a lot of people on the Hill tell me that Utah is kind of in that sweet spot where there's 6 people in our delegation, 2 senators, obviously, and then 4 members of the House. And we're just the right size for everyone to be able to work really well together. And Utah's members have done a good job of trying to work together and make sure we're covering everything that Utah needs covered. So we get committee assignments that are good for the state. Everybody works together. And that's not true in most states. some states are too big. California and Texas have a hard time coordinating. And then there are other states where they just don't band together as well to cover all of the ground. So I think Utah has a really good reputation. I've heard John Curtis say a lot of times, Utah punches above its weight. And it's true, and it's partly because we coordinate so well.
One of the things that's interesting thinking about Washington, D.C., and I'm just going to ask you about a quote from you in the Tribune recently. I want to get to the civility question a little bit. What's happening in Washington, D.C.? We've seen some interesting things in the speaker's race and the House that you want to join. In your op-ed, you said about civility that you will lead unapologetically and with civility and grace. What does that mean? And how does this happen?
Well, I will stand by that quote. I plan to lead unapologetically and with civility and grace. And I've tried to do that through the whole campaign. So now I'm worried that you don't know what that means, because I was hoping it was obvious by now. So I will
in the
explain.
context of what's happening in D.C. is what
Yeah.
I think is interesting.
No, things are tough right now. I'm not under any illusions about how easy it'll be to walk into this Congress. But I decided early on I was going to run a very specific type of campaign. I have been wonky and maybe even kind of boring, and on purpose. I talk about issues, I talk about policy, I talk about the role of government. I try to avoid talking about the other party. I'll let them define their own issues. I talk about what I want to do. And I've tried to avoid talking about other people. I'll let them define themselves. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about me and what I want to do. And I'm conservative, and I have strong views on how the government should run, and I'm unapologetic about that. I'm not going to be, I'm going to be unbending when it comes to those kind of principles and policies, but I'm going to do it without insulting people and without picking fights I don't have to have, and without trying to whip people up emotionally in a way that makes politics ugly. And I've stuck with that, and I think it's working. I think voters are really responding to that. I think people are tired of getting fed political junk food all the time. I mean, it's easy to take in. It's easy to read a tweet and decide yes, no, good, bad. It takes a little bit more effort to talk through issues and policies and understand the nuance. But I think people are tired of the quick yes, no, good, bad kind of thing. And they've responded really well on the campaign trail to my message of this is what I want to do. This is how I think things should be run, without much baiting, without much red meat or fiery issues to get people fired up.
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting dynamics in D.C. that's led to a little bit of this division is there's such slim majorities. There's slim majority, and just a few votes can dramatically impact the direction. Your thoughts about reaching across the aisle, because it seems like that's what might need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it needs to happen. That's what they're working on right now. But I do have some experience working on the Hill, and almost everything I worked on was bipartisan. So the idea that people don't reach across the aisle anymore is actually, it's more of a perception than a reality. There's a lot of work that goes on across the aisle. And when I'm on the campaign trail and we talk about bipartisanship, there's usually one of two reactions. Either people want more bipartisanship because they think that'll help us get more things done and take the temperature down a little bit in politics, or they're scared of bipartisanship because they think being bipartisan means that you're compromising your principles and you're not, representing your constituents well. You're just playing the game. I think I went dead. Is my mic working?
Yeah.
Okay. It got quiet on me. Maybe I went deaf. I don't know. And so my view on bipartisanship is I'm always willing to be bipartisan and work with the other side when we can find things we agree on. But bipartisanship just for the sake of bipartisanship sometimes does lead to outcomes that nobody's happy with that aren't actually good for anyone. So I will be sticking with my civility commitment and not making enemies out of people so that I can work with them when we can find common ground. But I'm going to be unbending on principles.
One of the issues that you'll have, if you are the candidate that wins this race, you have to get engaged in almost immediately, is questions about funding for conflicts happening around the world. I'm curious what your position is on the role of the United States in places around the world, funding you see in Ukraine and Gaza. These are very big questions. Your thoughts about where the United States should be?
Another question I've answered a lot, but it's a dynamic situation and things keep changing. we're still the world's superpower. We do have a role to play in the world. I'm not an isolationist. I don't think we should just ignore everything that's happening in the world, but we can't be the world's babysitter either. And when it comes to Israel, we have a special relationship with Israel. I think we have a responsibility to support them when they're defending themselves. We don't have the same relationship with every other nation in the world. So the answer to what kind of funding we should be sending to other countries has a lot to do with what our relationship is with those countries. And so the answer right now for that is those are questions that need to be answered through robust debate in Congress. Those are the conversations that we need to be having. The American people need to weigh in, but we can't just ignore the rest of the world and let it burn down. I think some of what's happening right now in Washington is a good thing because that is what's happening. We're having those debates. It's not just that Congress is making these decisions behind closed doors and funding for foreign conflicts gets lumped in with something else and pushed through without debate. The debate's happening, and I think that's a good thing. I am big on debate, as long as at the end of the day we remember that we're all Americans and we're all in this together. So we have the debate, but then we live together.
One more question before we turn it over to some of the students. I'm curious, given your experience in Congress, this is really getting to the budget, to our funding overall. Looks like we're going to have another continuing resolution, right? That is going to extend, kind of kick the can down the road just a little bit. But as I talk with students and particularly people around the state, the spending is a major concern. The deficit is a major concern. Your approach to how you would address that issue as a member of Congress?
Yeah, this is one of the things I talk about the most. Spending is out of control. We do have to address the deficit. It turns out that everything that's in the federal budget is in there because somebody wanted it in there and somebody benefits from it. So we all agree in principle that we need to spend less. And then when you start trying to cut things, it gets really difficult because there's somebody who feels like you're cutting the wrong things. And my approach is going to be just that unapologetic, unbending on principle. We're going to have to cut. There are going to be people who don't like it, but we can't keep going the way we're going. And I think that's also, those are the debates that are happening right now. Nobody wanted another CR. I think a lot of people are disappointed that the can's getting kicked down the road a little bit. But the good news is those conversations are happening. The reason we can't get the votes is because people are still debating how much money we should be spending, and that is an important debate. It's something that Congress needs to be talking about, and representatives need to be listening to their constituents on. So my approach is going to be to get in and roll up my sleeves and get to work with my colleagues on finding what needs to be cut and cutting it, and then coming back and talking to constituents and making sure they understand where I'm coming from and why I'm doing it. And I think voters are willing to feel a little bit of pain to get spending under control, but they want transparency. They want to be hearing from their representatives. They want to know what's getting cut and why.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see yourself working with our delegation? Are we going to be united? I mean, Utahns have a certain approach to where things that they would be willing to cut, which might not be the same everywhere. Are those conversations happening, or how are you going to do that? Because those will be very difficult discussions and decisions.
Yeah. Well, if I'm part of the federal delegation, then I absolutely intend to be talking to them regularly. And I know the members of the delegation do. They talk to each other a lot. They bounce these ideas off of each other. And I would be part of that.
Okay. Max?
All right. We have some time for a couple student questions. Does anyone have one?
Maybe just state your first name, if that's all right.
Yeah. I'm Brandon. In 2022, Justice Clarence Thomas, in his concurrence with the Dobbs decision, suggested revisiting Griswold, which was the Supreme Court case that created a right for women to have contraception. Yeah. Since then, Congress has attempted to pass bills twice, assuring that right. And I wanted to know, would you vote with bills that would codify that right?
That's not at all a controversial question. Thank you for that. When it comes to legislation, the devil's always in the details. So giving you a yes or no answer on that would be disingenuous, but I am definitely willing to be part of that conversation. I mean, as a woman of reproductive age who has used contraceptives, I think I'm very qualified to be part of that conversation. The difficulty usually comes down to who's paying for it, and that's a conversation I'm willing to have. But I think we live in a very different world now than we did when Griswold passed, where most people accept the idea that women should be able to get contraceptives. Where it gets controversial is whether taxpayers should be forced to pay for contraceptives, or whether someone who has a religious objection to contraceptives should be forced to pay for somebody else's contraceptives. And so when it comes to legislation, those questions would have to be answered. But I'm willing to get in the fray and be part of that conversation. And I would love to see some sort of legislation that settles that question so it's not up in the air.
You know, to kind of take that question up a level too, and because we don't know what the text of those might be, but when it comes to the kind of the principle of some sort of federal legislation on this, your thoughts about, not to the details of it, but your thoughts about the federal government stepping in on this issue.
Yeah. Generally, I think we're better off when the federal government does not step in on people's healthcare issues. But the reality is we live in a world where the federal government's involved in so many different aspects of society that you can't answer this question without there being a federal nexus. The federal government's the biggest employer in the world, so even if the question is about employee benefits, there's going to be a federal nexus. So I'm fine with weighing in legislatively. It just needs to be a law that takes into account the other protections people have, including religious freedom.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Hi, my name is Ben. Earlier, you opened with saying that you would be leading with principle and that you would not be making enemies. You said that you were glad that wasn't a controversial question that he answered, but this answer might be controversial depending on how you answer. Would you be, you mentioned that you wanted to shrink the powers of the executive branch. Would that change if there was a newcomer in the upcoming 24 election? Depending on which party was in power at that time? And then would you support a peaceful transfer of power, like different than what we saw in the 2020 election?
So that actually is a really easy question. I don't care who's in the White House. I think the executive branch is too powerful. Congress needs to use the power of the purse to get the executive branch back in check. I mean, that's the way our system's designed. We have checks and balances. And Congress has allowed the executive branch to get too powerful. Congress has created agencies and funded them. And so this is firmly within Congress's wheelhouse. And I support a peaceful transfer of power. I mean, that's part of what makes America unique in the world, is that we do support peaceful transfer of power. We have elections, and then people move on. So that was an easy question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stina. I would like to apologize if you've asked this question before. I'm sorry I had to come in a little late because I had a class that ended at like exactly at noon. But I was wondering, we've obviously seen a lot of strife within the House GOP conference recently. We've seen alleged almost violence taking place. And I wanted to know what role would you want to play in the House GOP conference, and what kind of steps would you take to possibly lowering that strife and lowering that just that absolute gap that's taking place right now?
I have seen the same headlines you've seen. I don't have any inside information about what's going on in the House right now. But I've kind of already answered this question, but I'll put a fine point on it. My approach to being a member of the House would be to talk principles, to talk policy, to stick with platform issues whenever possible, and try to take the temperature down. I don't think you need any new program or any magic wand to be able to do that. It just takes the people who are involved in these conversations and debates being less personal and more principled. Emotions are clearly running high right now. It's the end of the year. They're under some strict deadlines, and we've had some unprecedented changes in the House. And I think the role I could play is being a part of that without escalating any of the tensions. Be a person who can come in and help get work done and stick with policy and principles and not escalate any of the tensions or the personality politics that seem to be going on.
All right, sorry, we have time for just one more question, so.
Hi, I'm Becca. You talked a lot about the Israel conflict, and while I agree having diplomatic relations and allies is extremely important, at what point do we as a federal government have to hold those powers accountable as a hegemonic power? And with, sorry, I'm wording this terribly, but as we trade more weapons, when do we realize that that blood is on our hands and people are dying?
So first of all, great job. It is tough when you're on the spot and it's being live streamed and you have a mic to figure out how to word things. I can empathize there. But I think what you're asking is there a point at which we don't support other nations because the blood that they're spilling is on our heads? And I don't have an exact answer for you on where that point is. I do know that when it comes to Israel, we have a special relationship with Israel. They're our most important partner in that part of the world for military intel sharing, and we have a responsibility to support them when they're defending themselves. Obviously, there would be some point at which we wouldn't support them if they were committing war crimes. As far as I know, we're not at that point yet. So, thank you.
Okay, to wrap this up, just take just a moment and just kind of your final statement, and hopefully a little bit about for the students to stay engaged in this political process, because I know that from the Hinckley Institute, this is a prime objective for us, and sometimes based on what happens in politics, one might feel the urge sometimes to not engage. Yeah. Not our students, of course, but one might.
Well, yeah, and anybody who's here is already engaging, but my final point would be, one, I'm talking to students at a university. I want to make sure I point out that, when I was your age, I had no intention of ever being involved in politics. This isn't the life plan that I thought I was going to follow. But the fact that someone in this country can, go to college, get a job, and then later decide they want to run for Congress and be able to get into it is amazing, and let's not lose sight of that. It's exhausting, and sometimes people don't want to be involved because it looks contentious, but it is an amazing opportunity. This is proof that the American dream is alive and well. And then the last thing I would want to say in a room full of students is get involved in the process in whatever ways you do feel comfortable. You don't have to force yourself to be somebody that you're not, but go to your caucuses. People who show up and get involved end up making the decisions, and people who show up and get involved end up sometimes changing their minds. You learn, you get to know people, you have experiences. So if you're not the kind of person who wants to run for office, show up at things like this, ask questions, go to your caucuses, run to be a delegate. That's how you have a voice. That's how you have a say. And the fact that we're all allowed to have a voice and have a say is amazing. We've all had it, and we've never had to live without it. And so it's easy to take for granted, but don't take it for granted. We don't have enough people under the age of 40, or probably even under the age of 50, getting involved in caucuses and showing up at convention and being part of the political process. And the people who are involved are making decisions that impact your future. So make sure you're the people who are involved.
All right, that's the last question. Let's give a hand candidate for 2nd Congressional District, Celeste Maloy. Thank you. Okay, you all can stand but not leave, all right? We're gonna keep continuing, all right? So thank you for your participation today, thank you.
I'm gonna leave this
here
because I haven't touched
Okay,
it, so.
perfect. Okay, thank you. And Nick will grab the microphone.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. This is great.
5 days, 7 hours, 36 minutes.
Hey, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank
Let's
you.
make sure your microphone is working.
Okay.
Nick, is her microphone working?
So I don't need this one?
Oh yeah, that sounds better.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds really good.
Hello.
Have a seat. Thank you.
Thank you, it's so great to be here.
We're so glad to have you with us, Senator Riebe, to have some candidate conversations. Our great students are here from the University of Utah. They have some great questions, and if you're okay, well, I'll ask you questions for about 20 minutes-ish.
That's
and then
fine.
the students have a few questions for you also,
Great.
if that's okay.
Perfect.
So if I can just start off, and there's similar questions to what we just heard. But a curious thing, I've known you for a very long time. So I have some of my own, experiences about what you have done. But I'm kind of curious. The one thing maybe an interesting thing about you we might not know based on your time as a legislator, as an educator, just something that we might not necessarily know that we should about you?
Before I became a teacher, I was actually a truck driver, a bartender up in Alta, a ski bum, a police dispatcher, a caterer, and a wildland firefighter. So my mother was not proud that I did these things, but I do hold them to like the highest regard. They were the best years of my life, and I had a ton of fun driving around the country, 3 hot in a cot. So that was definitely something that maybe some of you don't know about me.
I didn't know some of those things.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this 2nd congressional district. By design, by our legislature.
Gerrymandering.
So I want to talk about that for a second because the decision was made, at least by a majority.
Yes.
I guess I'll say that. That you would have urban populations with rural populations. You have had a chance to represent a more urban area, but you had a chance to tour a lot of. You've been campaigning heavily in rural Utah as well. I'm kind of curious about your approach as a member of Congress, making sure you represent these 2 groups that have been brought together, at least by design.
You know, I think that a good analogy for that would be the work I've done in education. When we have had education bills, we struggle because we have really large districts, really small districts, charter schools, home schools, private schools. And so when you talk to those communities, they all have very unique needs, but they also have very similar needs. So sometimes in the past, I've had to like call some of the districts out. I'm like, okay, we need to move forward on this. And so we're all just going to have to take one for the team and then realize next time it's going to be better. So in education, there are common goods, but you can't always micromanage every detail. And I think that I was just talking to another set of students that creating a law that has elasticity to meet the needs of those communities is what we really mean by local control. So getting those funds to those areas and then giving them the ability to change it or mold it the way that they need to is what I think is best when we create policies in the state and nationally.
Well, what are some themes that you've seen in your meetings with people around that entire district? Some things that are similar, but also some emerging kind of needs that they might have that you'll be able to take care of as a member of Congress?
You know, I thought that I'd see more discrepancies, but I haven't. Really, when I go from city to city to city, it's the same thing everywhere. People are really concerned about air quality, housing, healthcare, jobs, inflation, deficit. So I haven't seen this discrepancy that people describe as much. People are really worried about their families and how they can take care of them. And so I think we come up with this idea that there's these big differences and there isn't. You know, I think one of the things that people think is really important to Southern Utah is public lands, but we feel just as strongly about our public lands here as we do there. I mean, they're the gems of the state, and if we can take care of them well and create a partnership with our federal government to receive those resources off of them, but also protect them for future generations, I think would be the best for everybody in the state.
Well, one of the topics that came up in our earlier conversation had to do with water. And your approach as a federal government to water policy, water needs in the state of Utah.
Yeah, last session, we all dressed in blue, we were all going to talk about water, and almost none of those bills passed, which was very distressing to me and my caucus. We've worked really hard to come up with numerous bills that would address some of the water issues for the Great Salt Lake and all around the state of Utah. I personally ran a bill trying to create a situation where if you're building new houses, you have to put in low-flow toilets and have more efficient use of water, and that didn't go anywhere. So I feel the state of Utah could do more, and we aren't. And so nationally, we would have to try to jump in and address that because we do have a partnership with the states around us. So it's really important that we come to a solution quickly and we do more to make those solutions happen.
You're coming from a position as a state senator where you have very clear policy direction for the state of Utah. Translate that to you as a member of Congress. How does that experience help there, and how will you use it maybe on this particular area in particular, water in the state, maybe it's environmental issues as well, but given the hat you've had here to what you will have there, because there's always the states' rights issue, and there's some things that the federal government maybe could do very well.
Definitely. Unfortunately, I feel like this water issue is getting so dire that we're going to have to rely on the federal government to come in and kind of tell us what we need to do. And I would not like to see that happen. I'd like us to have local control, and that's something that we cherish here in the state of Utah. So back to education, we get a lot of money from federal government, and so when we are doing the things we need to do and we're moving efficiently, the federal government does not need to step in. But when we are not acting efficiently and we're not doing the best for all Utahns, and I think the federal government starts to play a heavier role. I like the federal government to be guardrails for our states, and I'm not seeing some of that with some of the policies we've had in the past. I mean, if we look with water, it's going to get that dire that we're going to have the federal government step in, but I wish we could act more aggressively.
When you think about this position, many times when you're running a set of priorities, you start developing in your mind what they're going to be. What would your priorities be as a member of Congress? And then a little bit about your thoughts on committee assignments you're interested in, realizing it takes some time to get to those sometimes, but committee assignments you're interested in.
So I was on the state school board, and I was a low man on the totem pole, and I got finance, and I was like, oh, no one wants to be in finance. How did I get stuck in that one? So we renamed it finance, and then I realized all the money comes from, everything happens through money. So I'm like, hey, this is the greatest place to be. So it was awesome, and it was really fun to be a part of that. So I have no preconceived notions that I'm going to get a committee that I really, really want. I think I'm going to be in a committee that needs to have a new person on it. And I think that my highest priority is going to try to make alliances with people across the aisle and across committees, because what I'm seeing right now in the House is devastating. My priority would be to make sure the government keeps working, and if we're not to close, because the last time we closed and I looked at some of the situations that were happening across this state, it really negatively impacted a lot of families. So when I just being a part of government and being a part of the Senate, I know that committees are not always chosen but given, and so I'm ready for anything, any opportunity I'm given to. I'm ready to reach across the aisle and work on that.
The issue you just brought up a little bit too is definitely about funding, for example. And so what's happening, a continuing resolution is about to happen. I guess government's not going to shut down tomorrow,
That's great.
as we thought that it might. But talk about that, because at the heart of this is a lot of spending, high deficit, and these are two issues that are very important, not just state of Utah, but I hear it from our students also.
Yeah.
Your thought about how to approach that?
I think about what we're passing on to this next generation, and I'm sorry, it's not good. We really should be doing better by y'all, but we definitely have had some struggles the last, 5 years, 4 years. COVID has not helped our deficit. The continuing political unrest and wars across the country and across the nation, the globe, are not helping us. So right now, trying to take aggressive actions, trying to reduce the deficit, probably are not going to happen. Stabilizing our house, stabilizing our government, making sure people feel secure in our country would definitely allow us to be more of that beacon on the hill that we've always talked about as the United States of America. So how are we going to deal with the deficit? When we had when COVID came last time, we all went into our committees and we said we're going to have to cut every budget. So I think when we start looking into what's happening at the federal government, we have to have everything on the table, and we have to start looking at these things really reflectively and be critical. There's a lot of changes we can make in Social Security as well as Department of Defense, and those have to be willing to be looked at. So I would be ready to look at each one of those and see where the money's going, how we can be more efficient, and start getting to work once we get our house in order.
Your thoughts about addressing those issues with the other 3 members of our delegation from the state of Utah?
I think that we have, I think some of them are going to be much easier to work with than others. I am always willing to find solutions. As a senator here in the state of Utah, as a minority, every bill I've ever passed has been bipartisan, and I've really supported a lot of bills that have been across the aisle. So I'm ready to work with each and every one of them to find solutions in any way I can. I think some of them are more aligned with me than others, but when it comes to doing what's right for the nation as well as doing what's right for Utah, I've always voted for the Utahns' best interests.
One of the issues that our students talk a lot about from an observation is this idea of civility in politics. You come from a family full of public servants. I'm kind of curious how that frames your approach to civility and some ideas about what we can do, you or maybe even our students, as we look at this issue, trying to bring some of that civility back.
Carol Spackman-Moss and I always laugh about our teaching experience. And when you're a teacher, you don't really get to say what you want to say all the time. So you actually have to craft your message in a very kind, sensitive way, but get your message out there. So I think that's part of civility in politics. You know, there's things that have to be said, and you have to say them aggressively, but you also have to be honest and truthful. So yesterday we were talking about the sensitive material bills, and I am against that. And I'm like, these are the facts, and we have to look at those. And so being factual and stating your concerns is civil. Calling out people with subjective language or feelings or anything that has any kind of emotion attached to it is not civil. So I think that when you are a police officer, a teacher, a nurse, or a firefighter, you always have to recognize that you're the face of the government, you're the face of reason, and you have to be that person. You're not allowed to be too emotional. You have to really be somebody that can be counted on.
One of the issues that is top of mind here on campus is what's happening in other parts of the world. And so if you can take a second and talk about what you see the role of the United States is in the world, with what's happening in Gaza, for example, Ukraine, for example. This is top of mind. Your thoughts about where the United States should be on these issues and to what extent we should be involved.
Well, like I said, we have a lot of unrest in our country right now. We have a lot of political divide, and that's actually not helping us be the leader that we have been in the past. So I think that with the instability of our House and the instability in our politics, it's actually provided a vacuum for other leaders to assert power that maybe they shouldn't have. I support Ukraine and them protecting their borders. And what's happening in Israel and on the Gaza Strip is just devastating. We were trying to craft a message to illustrate our feelings about what's happening there, and it's a humanitarian crisis right now. So we hemmed and hawed. We went back and forth on all the language, and we're recognizing that Israel definitely has the right to defend themselves. But right now, what's happening in Gaza is a humanitarian crisis, and it has to be addressed as well. So trying to find that balance is really difficult. And so I really believe that we need to be the strong country that we are. We need to come together and be the leader that we have been in the past. And so I hopefully, with some of these elections and some of the things that have happened across the state, we can have that cohesion again.
What do you think about sort of the Utah approach to these issues? Is it the same as you're seeing in other parts of the country, or is there some unique approach or ideology from Utah as a whole that that would maybe have some influence on these policy decisions?
As a minority member of the Senate, some of these statements of like disagreeing better don't really ring as well with me. I feel like if we want to disagree better, we should have more open conversations. I feel like sometimes the conversations are one-sided. But I do believe that we do work together. So in the state of Utah, we passed over 500 bills, and 90% of them were unanimous. So there's work to always be done. There's always work to find a common solution. But on those wedge issues, that's where we're always going to struggle. And so I think like I said, 90% of those situations that move the ball forward for getting things done, we have done an excellent job on. So I think we can definitely take that to the federal government.
Okay. I have a couple follow-ups, but let's take a moment and take some questions from the audience.
Okay.
If that's okay, from our students.
Hello.
Okay. I think okay, we have a couple coming around. Just state your full name if that's okay, so the senator will know.
Hi, so I'm Kira Grizel. I just had a question for you. So you're talking a lot about trying to find consensus and be bipartisan. And I was wondering how that would apply to things like abortion policies.
Finding consensus on abortion policy. So right now we have a ban that's coming through, and that's been kind of talked about a little bit. I don't think that is a reasonable or safe option for most families. there are lots of things that happen in our communities and in our lives that cause us to need reproductive care. That should be a decision with us. I think when you start looking at abortion, there is a line that some people won't cross, and I can agree with them if it's an extreme measure that we need to talk about. But right now, it's gone too far. So there's always an avenue that we can find, that we can agree upon. And I don't believe everybody should get what they want, but I think that there's a path there for, you know, women getting the reproductive health care that they need, but up to a certain point, we stop.
Hey, do you mind doing a follow-up on that? Because this is on the state policy. You looked at this at length, which was a great question too. Talk about but the federal approach. You know, we don't know what the text of some federal legislation might be, but if there was federal legislation, is that an appropriate place for these discussions to be had, or for legislation to be passed?
Well, the Supreme Court just said that it's going to go back to the states, and I don't really agree with that completely. I think that they could say that there's a certain guardrails that we could put in place from state to state, but to have this idea that you can drive across state lines and get better reproductive health care kind of doesn't meet the needs of all Americans. I think there should be guardrails for women getting reproductive health care nationwide. And I don't think that we should have bans in some states and not other states. What that actual guardrail is, I'm not really certain right now, because I would want it to be a cohesive thing that we could more agree upon, but banning is definitely not on the table for me.
Next question. Do we have one over here? You can ask one too. It doesn't just have to be a student. So we got a couple hands. Are you a student?
Student of life, right?
I haven't seen you at Hinckley, but I'm glad you're here. That's why I thought your hand went down.
No, SLCC counts.
Excellent. It does.
What I haven't heard from this group so far, and I'd hope you would address it, not at the 3,000-foot level, but on the ground level. Each and every one of these students, including myself, pays a lot of money to come here and be a part of this conversation and get a degree from a solid university. Republicans, as far as I can tell, are pretty much united in helping students like these out financially. What would you do?
The question is, Republicans are helping students out?
Do not.
Oh, do not. Oh, okay. So I don't really think helping students should be a partisan issue. I think that we should be figuring out ways to help people in education. So I wish it wasn't partisan. As a person who has been on the higher education board for the last 5 years, it's amazing what the state of Utah does do to help students be successful. We have actually one of the most nimble systems in the nation. You can go to any one of the universities and transfer over any of your credits quite easily. And you can also get micro-credentials where you can actually increase your salary as well as increase your knowledge. And so I believe education is important, because when you start thinking about your earning potential, you're also thinking about how you can extend your life and actually have a better quality of life through your degree. How can we help you pay for that? I think about myself being a commuter student when I went to college and paying the full ride for being someone who goes to a university. Maybe we should have a better cafeteria plan where if you're not living here, you're not paying some of those dues to pay for like the pool and the climbing wall that my son showed me because he's going here. And I'm like, wow, this is like a country club. You've done an amazing job. But there are some people that aren't using those. And unfortunately, those are our lower income students who can't live here. So maybe creating a cafeteria plan. Creating, you know, we talk about student forgiveness, student loan forgiveness, and that's really been contentious. So when I think about trying to provide a situation for all, maybe providing opportunities for people who are carrying large student debt to have a better opportunity to get into a home with a grant for housing. So trying to figure out how to alleviate student debt is something that is really problematic because it's not equal across the board. So to make a rule to say that we're going to release that debt is really hard for some people to swallow. So trying to find another alternative that we could use to pull some other levers. Did you have a follow-up on that one? Okay. I do think it's a problem, but it's something that I had to deal with as well. Yeah.
Hi, Senator Riebe.
Hi.
All right. So your opponent stated that that the war crimes that are going on in Gaza are an if, not that they already happened. And you said it was a humanitarian crisis. There is a coalition that's building in the House. I know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is heavily involved in. Would you sign on to that coalition if you were elected to the House?
Tell me what the coalition is again, please. Can you describe it better?
It's basically just asking for a ceasefire in Gaza. That's the cliff notes that I'm aware of.
Yeah. This has become horrific. I mean, I was reading, I get up in the morning, I read all my emails, I read a couple of papers, and I go to school. But to hear the conversations coming out of Gaza are horrific. It is a humanitarian crisis. So trying to alleviate that with a ceasefire is something that we definitely have to think about. Problematically, though, is we have a terrorist organization that has figured out ways to put their most important assets next to hospitals, schools. And so how do you figure this out without alleviating the terrorist organization's unique plan of creating their hostages as being civilians? So a ceasefire would help Hamas, but it would help the people. So it's a very, very, very fine needle that we have to thread right there. So I would work for any solution that we could come up with. And I know that our military and their military is more precise than it's ever been. And so those are things we'd have to look at. But it is a very, very problematic situation.
My name is James, and I'm particularly concerned with areas of foreign policy. And I was wondering, because I think it's fairly safe to say that the United States, we are directly competing with China, and we have been for a few years now. And I'm just wondering what sort of tone you would take towards China and how we should proceed from where we're at now.
Thanks, James. That's a very interesting question. China is gaining while we are actually helping. And the more we help our global partners, China is moving forward. And so that's an unfortunate reality. When people ask me, China has to spend a lot of time and energy not allowing their people to be free. So when we look to China and we say, how can we rein them in? I think that they're busy oppressing their own people, quite honestly. So how do we deal with them? We are looking at some of their debt that they have given to other countries. I know that Africa, they are expanding, going into those countries to create situations where they are very indebted to the Chinese government. How do we stop that? That's beyond our control sometimes, but we are going to have to start looking at that more seriously, because as the money flows, that's how the power flows. So I am very concerned about China's ability to give that money and those assets to other countries to gain that power there. How we're going to stop that is yet to be seen, and I'm open for solutions for that. But I am very concerned about China's ability to do that.
One right here, Nick.
Hi, I'm Brandon Sipes. Earlier today, the House Ethics Committee found substantial evidence that George Santos violated federal law. There was just a motion to expel him from Congress. His Republican Party in his district and the state Republican Party in New York have both called on him to resign. Would you vote to expel him, considering he has refused to resign?
Yes, I would. I find that really distressing that Santos has got as far as he has. I was born in New York, and I'm kind of shocked that he wasn't vetted better. The party of law and order should start being the party of law and order. He should be expelled, and it's not okay that his campaign was built on fabrication.
I think it's going to have to be the last question. If you'd be willing to take a moment, just kind of as a last statement here, all right? We've got 5 days left, and we're not counting.
How many hours? 5 days,
Yes,
7 hours.
it's always interesting, the campaign time. Just kind of talking, just kind of a closing statement about you, your approach and why you're running, and maybe a little bit about student participation. Because we like students to stay engaged in the political process. Someone in this room, I'm sure, will run for office one day, which is what we're trying to do as well. So maybe just those two things as we close.
How my campaign has gone? Is that the question?
No, I'm talking about just about you, just kind of your final statement to us, the people who, in this room who will be voting for you as well.
I have been so honored to be elected to these situations. I have enjoyed every minute of it. It's been super fun. When people ask me how it's to run for office, it's great. It's meeting the people in your community. It's getting to know the people around you. It's sometimes hard to hear some of the sad stories that you have to deal with, but it's also nice to find solutions. I had a person I walk my dog with, and he had a situation with his granddaughter, and I was able to help him. So that's what I say puts the gas in the engine to keep you going. I wish you would all get involved. A couple of years ago, I tweeted out, I'm like, hey, if you guys like reality TV, I'm heading to my local city council meeting. Please meet me there, because if you want reality, it doesn't get any realer than this. And we don't have a lot of people showing up to our city meetings, and we don't have a lot of people showing up to our local school board meetings. And so as young citizens, if you want to see a difference in the future, you need to be involved. I think that for me, it's been really rewarding to be able to make a change. When I talk about something that's happening in my schools and to be able to run a bill, you're like, you can do that? I'm like, yeah, it's amazing. Some of the bills that have come to me from my neighborhood are kids that are experiencing troubles in the legal system have to take a whole day off of work with their parents to drive to the county courthouse or the state courthouse. So I'm opening a bill file that says that schools may provide a safe space for students to attend court proceedings in their schools. So it's not always these really grand gestures that make a difference in people's lives. It's the everyday things that make life better. And so to know that you could affect change piece by piece, pebble by pebble, kind of puts those boulders in a better place. So I feel that that's something that I have done, and it's really been rewarding. And I beg of you to get involved. I beg of you to show up to positions and be the leaders that you want to see in us, because we take our cues from you.
Let's give a hand, candidate for 2nd Congressional District, Senator Kathleen Riebe.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's so great to do it.